Really. First of all, Sally, thank you for sparing your time.
Thank you for
in giving us this
inviting me.
interview.
Yes,
Really. Could you give an introduction about yourself?
So my name is Gulzar Hussain. I run a company called Frozen Himalayas, and I'm a trained naturalist. So my expertise is snow leopards and big cats, and I also do a lot of ethnographic work, working with tribal communities across Western Himalayas. Yeah.
Alright, thank you. Okay, so what are your views on the current pace of tourism development in Ladakh?
I think when you actually look at the trend, to understand what's happening today, we have to go back a couple of decades ago. Let's say, international tourists started coming in 1974, and since then the arrival has become multifold. Last year trajectory is that around more than 400,000 tourists visited Ladakh, and that too in a very short span of time, which is from May until September, early September. So I think given the fact that the numbers have increased so much, the issue is, do we actually have the infrastructure to support such flow of tourists? Infrastructure can be anything from proper hygienic toilets all across the tourist destinations, or hotels or guest houses. I think the eye-opener was this year during May-June, when suddenly people were not expecting such flow of tourists coming in, and then suddenly hundreds and thousands of people came in a very short period of time, and a lot of people couldn't get taxis. So things like this, I think it's also very it's extremely dangerous for a destination, because people who actually come with an expectation of because in tourism everything is sold virtually, right? And then there's a time when the moment of truth comes, when the tourist actually arrives, and they get to experience the experiences that your travel agent or the host has designed. And then if there is an interruption or disconnection in that, that creates a lot of negative marketing for a destination like Ladakh. I know a lot of people who actually came here with families and then couldn't get taxis, so basically they couldn't go to Pangong, Nubra, and other places that they were supposed to visit. So I think the most important thing we have to look into is do a proper study of your carrying capacity, actually in a span of time, how much tourists you can actually accommodate. And I think for a place like Ladakh, for whatever reason I don't understand, and it's still happening until today, that Ladakh is sold as a destination that's only open from let's say around May until end of September. When you look at the international arrivals in India, it actually is from November until April, and unfortunately we say that Ladakh is closed for business in that period. Whereas I think the problem is not that the numbers of tourists have increased. The problem is all these tourists visiting in a very short span of time. I think after COVID, the entire tourism industry has shaken up, and then we need to design, we need to rethink the entire tourism concept, how we want to go about it. And especially now, sustainable tourism is not a niche anymore. It's the only way out. Earlier there was a misconception that only certain type of tourist who comes to any destination prefers to travel in a sustainable way. But I think that amount of stress that that a tourist, actually the carbon footprints that they leave, according to a very interesting study that was done in 2017, and Nature Climate Change organization, they came up with a study saying that tourism contributes 8% to the global carbon emission. So that's there. But again, on the other hand, tourism is also a sector that provides a huge amount of employment opportunity, which in turn brings social change and makes the community's life better. They have access to good education, good roads, and this and all that. So that's there. But I think the most important thing is we need to rethink the entire tourism strategy, so that we don't get in a situation like we were this year during the summer.
Right, right. Sir, so as you said, that sustainable tourism, it is no longer a niche concept,
Yeah.
and we have to incorporate it
Yeah.
in all forms of tourism.
Sure.
So now many people are of the view, and they think that the benefits of tourism, they outweigh the costs. And do you really think that the benefits are too much, and that we should really ignore the cost of tourism? What are your views on that?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and of course there are pros and cons of tourism also. But when you actually look at a place like Ladakh, let's look at a broader scenario. Let's look at the global contribution of tourism. Tourism contributes almost 10% to the world GDP, which is a
Yes.
significant amount. And in a place like Ladakh, the only industry that it's there at the moment is tourism, and the impact it has on the community is huge. So yes, there are some cons, but I think the problem is, you need proper planning and policies. You need a vision, where you are heading in the next 10 years or 15 years. So I have a very interesting concept of looking at tourism. Okay, everyone has their own business model. I look at tourism as 4 C's, and it's not just me. There's lots of organizations throughout the world that actually follows this 4C concept. So in this 4C, there is conservation, there's community, there is commerce. Of course, tourism is an economic activity, and then the care. Conservation should be at the top of the policy, because coming to a place like Ladakh, which is ecologically extremely sensitive, the resources are scarce. Imagine there was an interesting study that came up recently saying that in 2 months there's more than 2.5 lakh tourists that visited. Our own community that lives in Ladakh district is just slightly over 1 point something lakh. So there were twice the amount of tourists that were there, in a short period of time. Then again, coming back to sustainability, I think people get confused between sustainability and ecotourism. Okay, sustainability is the umbrella under which the ecotourism, acts or operates. So what Ladakh really needs to do is rethink the entire tourism strategy. And the problem, I'm again adding it, the problem is not a large number of tourists coming to Ladakh. More number of people coming, it generates more revenue. But the problem is all these tourists visiting in a short period of time, which is 4 months, 4.5 months. So my idea is, now that we have become a UT. Earlier, I understand that all the tourism operations were run from somewhere else, and then Ladakh simply didn't have a lot of stake or say in it, because someone sitting somewhere else was planning and devising the whole policy, and there can be biases, depending on their own agenda and this and all that. But now, after becoming a UT, I think Ladakh really needs to sit and devise a strategy where at the top is the conservation, and then the community, and then the commerce, rather than thinking of tourism as a economic resource or a economic activity. The most important. And again, if your community is not happy, and then the problem in a place like Ladakh is everything is Leh centric, right? Look at Leh. Unfortunately, Leh has become a concrete jungle, with all this number of guest houses, and even I think my suggestion would be that tourism department also should restructure itself. A lot of people who come to Ladakh, they complain about all this, cement buildings and all this big buildings coming up and all that. So my take is that tourism department should have a different wing that comprises of a couple of architects, structural engineers and all that, where a lot of input, because you're building a guest house, you have no idea about the resources, the material. Anyone would like to reduce the cost and build a building that's actually energy efficient. So now there's a lot of research going on at different levels, at individual levels. Hayal is also doing a lot of research on build sustainable
Yes.
passive solar
Yes.
buildings.
Yes.
And I think that's the only way. And we talk a lot about sustainable tourism, but the major focus is again on the structure. uh, Sustainable tourism starts when people start putting all the hotels, guest houses, and restaurants start putting local food on the menu. And it's not just the menu, local produce should be used, and even, I mean, I've stayed in hotels there, which is they charge like 25K or 30K a night, and they only serve 5 local produce dishes. So I think you don't have to go overboard trying to serve everything. I mean, and my take is, I always tell people that people don't come to Leh or a place like Ladakh to eat. Coming here itself is a privilege. And on top of that, if you get local menu or local produce on their menu, there's nothing like that. So I think the most important thing is that all the hotels, restaurants, and guest houses should incorporate local cuisines. And I know that at the moment we don't have a lot to offer, but then again, you can contemporize, improve on the current recipes, and there are lots of people who are doing it. Artisanal alchemy is doing. There's another chef called Pankaj who is actually doing a 9-course meal based out of most of the ingredients locally sourced. So I think that's the only way out. So rather than just only focusing on the structure, sustainability begins with when you put local produce on your menu.
Yes.
So that's what I think, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, and then I think I think unless and until you have a vision of how sustainable tourism or tourist activities you want to operate, I think it's very difficult to blame each other, like he's doing that, he's doing that. So I think it's important that the tourism department, along with the UT administration, comes up with building regulations, not just the regulation, but also expertise that people like me, you, or anyone can actually go access that information or expertise, where people sitting in the tourism department architectural wing, which is not there now, but it can happen, can provide them, and better homestay infrastructures. You need to also diversify tourism into, so that the maximum benefit also reaches to the far corners of Ladakh and the community. And again, community, every policy, every decision that's being made or are about to make, you have to put community at the core of every policy. If the community is not happy, and if the decision that anyone is drafting or anyone is doing, if the community is not getting benefited, I think then that's not sustainable. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for the broad perspective on
Thank you.
sustainable tourism. So how can a layman or a local person or a tourist, for example, how can they practice sustainable tourism? Because a lot of people think that sustainable tourism has to be practiced only by the top-notch tourism organizations or by the big companies. So what are your views on that?
I think I mean, I think the concept of sustainability is more engraved in someone living in a village in Ladakh than someone, for instance, someone like me who lives in a city. I get up at 7 in the morning, I go get my bread, go outsource my vegetables and everything that basically comes from outside, and they all come in big trucks, with and there's a lot of carbon footprint for that food actually arriving into Leh. So I actually might talk about it, but then again, someone living in a village or a layman actually has, I mean, when you go to a village like in Kargil or Leh or Changtang, let's look at Changtang for example. People are pastoral, okay, and I mean, they believe that they would have never been able to survive in that harsh climate without the help of their domestic livestock. So from dairy to wool to meat, everything. So even the fuel that they consume, it's all animal waste. So I think they are actually living sustainable life. So when you actually incorporate something or like that into a tourism, my problem is not about, my problem is infrastructure that's being built all across Ladakh. It's concrete, and with concrete, I mean, it's you cannot operate it for 6 months in the winter because the pipes, the water, everything gets freezes. So I think a nomadic rebo in Changtang is more sustainable than any other big establishment or a tourist resort in Leh. So we need to work on it and improvise, bring in new products, new experiences that revolves around that concept. And again, you cannot expect a layman to build a guest house in a sustainable way. That's why, coming back to where I started, saying that the government and the tourism department should actually come up. It's a high time that they come up with a wing that comprises of structural engineers and architects that expertise in earth building, passive solar buildings. And automatically, if you build a passive solar building, your energy cost comes down. That means less carbon footprint, or less energy consumption. And I think that's the only way out. And I think we also can learn a lot from a layman living in a village, how he's completely dependent on his animal and farm, So just to build, I mean, you don't have to do, going back to where we started, that you don't have to, in a village, let's say in a village somewhere in Sham, you don't have to build 5-star hotels. You have to strengthen the already existing infrastructure. It can be a homestay, and a homestay is basically, you're not adding any rooms, you make it slightly more comfortable, put a bed, clean linen, a comfortable bed, lots of light in the room. But the biggest problem, what I've seen in homestays, it's the local toilet. Because a lot of people who actually come, Westerners especially, they're not used to squat. And Ladakhi toilet, dry composite toilet, which actually requires. But then again, there's a very interesting NGO called THF, Tibetan Heritage Fund. A guy called Yuthaka, who is an architect and is the head of THF here in Leh. He actually has designed a toilet which is eco-friendly. So basically, it's the same concept where you have a proper commode with you basically don't use water. So I mean, if you look at the prototype, I think and I again saying that like that one product, that one innovation will change the entire rural tourism in Ladakh if implemented properly. It's hygienic, it's clean. It helps you. It basically gives you the comfort of a Western toilet, but then there's no water that's used. So I think things like this, you don't have to go teach them or train them in a way. You just help them build, slightly more, important or components that will actually help a tourist have a better stay. Because at the end, it's the tourist who is going to evaluate you or review you or the level of comfort and whatever. So I think the only way, when we talk about sustainable tourism, we have to strengthen the already existing homestay concept and the infrastructure that's already there, and build, improve it, innovate, especially with the Ladakhi dry composite toilet. You make it slightly more Western, like tourist friendly, where they don't have to squat all the time. They sit